This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, episode 079.
Welcome to the show created by vets featuring absolutely no pets. This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, hosted by Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light. Our resident veterinarians have swapped out their stethoscopes in favor of microphones to bring you the Veterinary Project Podcast, a show focused on real conversations, aimed to connect this amazing profession full of remarkable people. Through the sharing of collective stories and wisdom, and connecting over the many unique challenges we face, we invite you to join our community of veterinary professionals leading intentional lives. And now, here are the hosts of the Veterinary Project Podcast, Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Veterinary Project Podcast, part 2 of our 4-part mini-series with Dr. Jordan Woodsworth. Recording the intro here, I tried to ask Jonathan about some of the things we could talk about. He's being very coy that he has something he's going to try and catch me with here. So I'm very curious, what is going through that pretty little head of yours?
Well, I appreciate you saying pretty because you said that now twice in the last 10 minutes. But we always talk about serious things that we're doing to improve ourselves in life, what we're doing to better ourselves, to progress in all the different facets that you and I are involved in. What we don't talk about sometimes is what kind of shit we get into. Literally,
our
lives are not progressing 24/7. We've got to have some fun on the side. Mikey B, what are you doing right now when you're not progressing forward?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't have anything like really good. Like I got a
we're in COVID. What
two-year-old
can be
kid
good
at
right
home
now? But within the realm of
the funnest thing I did recently was Rosalie surprised me with a pedicure. I might have already said this on the podcast. I don't remember.
Did
I?
Yep.
Okay. That was fantastic. Typically if I'm going to get a little bit wild, it'll usually involve a few drinks. We're recording this pre-Super Bowl, NFL Super Bowl. That's something I always look forward to. So we'll see. Usually some of the ball hockey guys get together for that. That could cause some ruckus. Last year, we bet fairly big on blue Gatorade as the color of Gatorade that would be dumped on the winning coach. And we hit. And we were getting our just butts kicked all night gambling on, like, you can live bet the Super Bowl, right? Like next play will be
this is new to me. How do you do this?
Through like Bodog. I wasn't running the like betting app. Another guy was, but we were all just throwing out bets, right? Like next play will be a pass. Next play will be a run. You can literally bet on anything you want at the Super Bowl. And so we were losing reasonably badly. And then at the end, we're like, screw it. All of it on blue Gatorade. And so we all threw in like $100. So it's not like thousands of dollars here. But blue Gatorade hit. So I think we ended up like several $100, enough to pay kind of like a good chunk of the bar tab and everything. So that was kind of the last time I really got into a ruckus.
Well, I like the odd time when I'll get a text going, I'm a little slow today. Something might have got carried away halfway through the week. And that didn't happen too long ago for you, actually.
I can't even remember.
It's like a Monday or a Tuesday. And you're going, yep, it's going to be a slow day today.
Well, I know when I went out to Edmonton to look at apartment buildings, and that was a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday trip. And it seems like every dinner meeting just turns into like, well, we're gonna have a few drinks with that and a few drinks after. And it's like, you're staying at a hotel and it's like, by the end of that, you're like, whoa, like I am not in university anymore. Like I can't do that.
Isn't that the case?
So anyway, let's turn this around here. Like, don't think you get to just point the finger and then lean back in that chair.
Dude, setting it up. We're winging it today. No, what do I do when I'm not doing those kinds of things? Well, right now we talk like we're on benders and serious drinkers. We're not. But I am almost on 2 weeks of no drinks, which I think feels pretty good because I was on vacation and May had some drinks with a fellow hockey player of ours and over again on those days. And not too much, but still enough to feel the effects of it afterwards. Right now, I'm going to bring this up for the first time. I love looking at NFTs. Right now, when I'm doing nothing progressive in life, I am telling my wife about the NFTs that we have purchased. And over the last 3 months, I have made some purchases of NFTs. And for anybody that doesn't know it, these are non-fungible tokens, which can be purchased off of the blockchain, which are attached to the blockchain. And I am going down this rabbit hole after rabbit hole in art and utility tokens and other cool things that I never thought I'd be interested in. And I will continue to harass Mike until he gets into it.
I mean, I like it. I love the curiosity. But yeah, you kind of got bit by the bug there and you're going in deep, and I'm not against it. I stick to like what I know more so. And eventually I'll probably get into the NFT space, but I don't know shit about it, man.
Dude, I am right now. I was on this website called Art Blocks, which is pretty cool. I know nothing about art. The longest I went into art was grade 9, and my teacher did most of the drawing that we had to do to pass grade 9 art. I'm not an artist by any means. I draw grade 1 stick knit. But NFTs now, some of the art that I'm learning about, and I'm putting that into quotation, it is pretty damn cool to learn about. And there's this whole dynamic of economics attached to it, which I also think, which is really interesting, and then gets into the whole world of crypto. We'll talk at a different time. So really right now, when I am sitting there at 8:30 at night, finally after the kids have gone to bed and I need a break from work, that's what I've been diving into.
I love it. Even here, you were saying you're selling some of your stocks, get more money over to the NFT space.
It's happened already.
Nice.
Yep. Can't deny the inevitable for the world. Web3.
It's coming. Okay, well, moving on. That was actually a pretty fun intro, Jonathan. I didn't know where you were taking us, so that was good. Okay, part 2 here with Dr. Jordan Woodsworth. We're diving into nonverbal communication. She kind of lays out a really neat framework. You know, the kinesics, proxemics, or I totally butchered that, proxemics, paralanguage, the autonomic components of it. I learned a lot in this, even some of it that I think maybe I intuitively knew, but I didn't know how to label it or know where it fit in. Anything that landed for you, Jonathan?
I think a confirmation of what's so important. And I think some of her asks at the end of the episode are really good, even if it is something that, like you said, innately, you and I believe, are pretty good at some of these skills, but intent versus impact, so important. And I'm the same as you. I got a lot out of this episode. Absolutely.
And I'll just build off that. The little challenges that Jordan gives at the end of these episodes, give them a shot, because that's where the real, value and growth comes from. So I'll leave it there. Another episode. You're going to love it. Dr. Jordan Woodsworth. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Dr. Jordan Woodsworth again for part 2 of our 4-part mini series. This time we're diving into nonverbal communication. So I know you said, Jordan, you have lots to say about this. So I guess let's jump on in. Nonverbal communication, vet clinic setting, but also just in life. Tell us more about that.
Excellent open-ended question.
I know. I was hoping you would catch that.
Of course I did.
For anybody that didn't listen to part 1, go listen.
Go back. Yeah. So I love talking about nonverbal communication because to me, it's something that many of us aren't all that aware of, but it's so stinking important. So I think one of the first things that I tell people that can sometimes blow their mind and get them sort of a little bit more interested in learning more about nonverbals is that only 20% of our communication is verbal. Like only 20% is the stuff that comes out of our faces. The rest, 80%, is nonverbal. So if we can have awareness around nonverbal communication and have a little bit of intentionality around how we are transmitting our nonverbals, that can really go a long way to improve the ways that we communicate with other people in any setting, including a veterinary one. So again, this is something that takes no extra time. If we have a little bit of awareness, we can sort of see the nonverbals that other people are transmitting. And then we can also have some control over our own. So lots of times people get worried about these communication skills because they think it's going to take them 10 years to actually get through an appointment if they're using them. But this is one that actually takes 0 extra time. So again, when we think about all the different pieces of how we communicate, there are sort of 4 different categories that we talk about. And so we were discussing this earlier, right, in terms of the tone of our voice and, interpersonal distance and all that sort of stuff. So there are, as I mentioned before, so there's kinesics. And that's like our facial expression, our body tension, our gestures, right? So I'm such a hand talker, like touch, and then even posture, even the posture of our bodies. There's proxemics, which again is the spatial relationships between us and the other person. So that's things like height differences or, whatever angle of facing, right? So if we're facing someone straight on as opposed to the side, right? And then things like barriers. So when there's exam tables in the way, or when we're holding a clipboard in front of us, or when there's a computer between us, or whatever it happens to be, right? Those are all part of proxemics, and they influence the ways that we can, develop rapport and communicate with our clients. There's paralanguage, and paralanguage is the tone of our voice, the rate and rhythm of our voice, the volume, the emphasis we use. And then there's autonomic changes, which are generally out of our control. So that's things like flushing. So I'm a blusher. My face blushes easily all the time. I've gotten used to it, but it's one of those things that's out of our control. And then we find typically when that happens, like our heart rate goes up and we're like, oh my God, everybody can notice. They think I'm embarrassed. Like now I have to actually be embarrassed, right? And so those things can really have an influence. Tearing, sweating, changes in our breathing, changes in our heart rate, involuntary swallowing, right? All of those things are those autonomic changes that we don't really have control over. But even though we don't have control over them, they're powerful because they help us to tune into what's going on with our own bodies, but they also help us tune into what's going on with the other person. And so if we are noticing, for instance, people are telling us that everything's fine and that, all's well, they don't have any concerns, but yet, you can tell that they're talking really quickly, or their face is flushed, or they're fidgeting, or any of those things, right? That's a mixed message. You know that there's something else going on. And then you can use your lovely open-ended questions and you can get a little bit more detailed, right? You can dig into that a little bit to try and find out what's up. Because again, we talked about previously that some of the reasons behind malpractice suits and people being disgruntled with our services is this, inappropriate communication or lack of good communication. And some of that comes down to us not noticing these mixed messages and not actually validating them and exploring them a little bit further with our clients. So I think that to me, these are all really interesting things that I often relate this back. Now, this is me being a real big geek, but I often relate this back to the stuff we learn about low stress handling for our patients. So I think about our nonverbal communication tools as low stress cat handling, but for people. Right? So because the way that I talk to students about how we use cat-friendly techniques and things like that is like really be aware of your heart rate, really be aware of the tone of your voice, the pace of your voice, all of those types of things. Yeah, your body proximity to the animal, all of those types of things. And so, and then get in control of those, use those in a way so that you actually can smooth out the interaction with the cat. Because like cats are like super in tune with our energy and our nonverbal communication. But so are other people. So if we can do the same thing, right? If we feel ourselves getting, activated because of what's going on in the exam room or in our conversation with another person, taking some deep breaths, right? Consciously trying to lower our heart rate, slowing down our voice. We can even use tricks like if we're having a conflict with a client or with a team member and they're standing up and they're using a loud tone of voice and they're doing all of those things, we can use these tools to be aware of what's going on and then oppose that. So we can sit down, we can slow down the pace of our speaking, we can lower the tone of our voices. And what you'll find is much of the time that alone diffuses the situation. And it's oftentimes people will mirror what you're doing. So it's a really fascinating tools that to me are huge. Like again, I can't say that one of these skills is more valuable than another, because to me, they're all incredibly valuable, but this one is huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, it's neat, like how you were playing with that, because I was thinking of the mirroring, like if you lean in and the other person will lean in, or maybe you're leaning on the exam room table and all of a sudden the client is, and using them like to build trust, but then also I never thought of it as the opposite, to like diffuse down the situation. That's clever.
Yeah.
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 There's
And I
so
think too,
much to unpack there, Jordan. Where does somebody that is maybe not consciously aware of their nonverbal cues or hasn't spent time with it, where does a person start? Because you used some truth bombs in there that have a lot of impact in day-to-day communication, whether it's in regular standpoint or in times of conflict. Where does a person start?
I would honestly start with tone of voice and pace of speaking, because I think those are things that are under our control, and they're things that we can very easily start to play with, right? And so let's give an example of, you've got a client who's in a rush, right? And so they're speaking quickly. They've got a heightened tone of voice, right? You can tell that they just want to like get off the phone or get out of the exam room. If you need their time still, right? First of all, I think asking for permission to continue using their time is very important, right? I can tell that it sounds like you've got some other things on the go. What kind of time do you have available for me right now, right? How many more minutes can I take of your time before we continue on with what we're doing with Fluffy, whatever it happens to be, right? But the other thing that you can do is, again, you can take that deep breath. You can start to slow down the way that you're talking, lower the tone of your voice, and see what happens. See how that translates to the way that the client or the other person responds. Because so often what that does is it starts to relax your nervous system, right? And I mean, even if you under any circumstance, if you're starting to feel activated, so your heart rate's going up, your palms are sweating, things like that, your autonomic changes are kicking in. If you take that step and just take a minute and take a really deep breath, just noticing how that feels in your body is so hugely important. And the really neat thing, and again, it's a little tricky these days with things like curbside service where we're not in the same space as our clients, but our nervous systems communicate with the nervous systems of people who are in our proximity. And so, if we can start to control our own feelings of calm and groundedness, now this sounds really woo-woo, I understand, but it's science, then we can actually have a big impact on that trust building and on the ways that we can actually have good outcomes with our clients, with our patients, with other people in our lives, just by paying attention to those things.
Mm-hmm. I know we've said it so many times now, just hitting on like the breath again. I can recall situations where once that autonomic kicks in, and then I would find myself actually like stop breathing, and you just start talking and you're running out of air, but you have more to say. So you're trying to get it in faster and faster. And it's just like, it just on loop, you're speeding up, you're running out of breath. I'm thinking my personal trainer has a saying, if you can't breathe there, you can't be there, right? It's not sustainable. And I think of this in conversation. And to be honest, when we started this podcast, the first few episodes, when record would go on, you would like lose your air and you're like, well, frick, now I've got no air to speak with. So very important for people to be able to like take that time. Even if the person's staring at you, just take a nice slow breath. It'll all be okay.
Absolutely.
Non-verbally, for those that might not be watching, as you said that phrase or those first few phrases, you could see yourself getting ramped up, and your verbals were showing more forward to the screen, and therefore everybody else was getting ramped up with it.
Yeah. And I was doing that on purpose. Like now with the comfort level, I can like turn that on or off. Before I couldn't, and it is all about the breathing. So Jordan, I kind of want to this is the first time I've heard like the words like the kinesics, the paralanguage and that. Can we maybe rip through some of those quickly, or, like the kinesics, the facial expressions, the postures? I know we don't have enough time to like hammer it fully, but, some do's and don'ts, what do you see are common mistakes? What can everyone, improve on?
Well, I think one of the things that, we're all in this point in time right now where we're all wearing masks. So facial expressions are really difficult to read anyway at this point in time. And so I think this is where we need to be a little bit more conscious of some of our other stuff. And so you talked before, Mike, about things like leaning in, right? And so we have to be aware that there's a power dynamic between us and our clients, right? But also, if we're veterinarians, if we're a doctor in the situation, there's also an inherent power dynamic between us and other staff members too. And like John, in your case, you're a manager, right? So between you and anyone else on staff, there's a power differential. And so we have to be really conscious of how much we are enacting that power differential through our nonverbals, right? So if we are getting into people's space more than we should, because we're leaning in, right? Or if we're in their personal bubble in some way, because that really elevates that intimidation that can happen just by nature of that power dynamic that's societally imposed. And I could go on about that forever. And so I think that those are some of the things that are really crucial at this point when we're not, we can't tell each other's facial expressions. But I think it's also really important, and Zoom has helped a lot with that, because being on screen more often, we're looking at ourselves more than we would otherwise, right? And being able to tell our facial expressions. So some people wear their emotions on their face like so transparently that you can automatically tell when they're annoyed, or you can automatically tell when they like dislike you, right? Or even if they don't, that's what's coming across for whatever reason, right? So like RBF, right? So I think that being aware of those things, and if that stuff applies to you, right? If you're someone for whom, as soon as you're frustrated, your face changes, you're kind of like this, you got to start being aware of that stuff. Because if you don't want that to be communicated to people, then you have to get some control over it. So being aware and consciously trying to make that change, which I think initially uses a lot of energy, but once you've practiced it a little bit, things change.
When you're saying this, it's wild how much that comes second nature. Like Jonathan and I, over however many episodes, we know when the other one's has something to say now, because we're seeing each other, so we don't have to like stumble like we used to. And do you remember, Jonathan, we did an episode with Whisker Cloud where it was audio only and no one could see anyone, and it was so hard to know like what is going on in this conversation. Like I can hear everyone, but we just chopped out the other 80% of the conversation. And I remember that being like, I feel like I'm under a blanket here and have no clue what's going on. So I don't know, just an observation as we're shooting this, and for everyone, like it is so real and happens so fast.
In the last 2 years in my business, I have tried about 90% of the time using video when I can. So whether it's interviews, whether it's with our clinic managers, we have a clinic managers every Thursday. I'm that guy that says, please turn your video on, because I want to be able to read the nonverbals, and it allows us to have a more fulfilling conversation, even if it is in conflict or discussion. Then we can get to the real crux of it, versus sometimes with the tone, somebody's good at it, you can't hear them, even though you can see what they actually mean. Fully agree with you, Mike.
I think that having that, it's all wacky because we can't share the same space with people. And so it's really difficult. Sometimes it actually is more energetically draining for us to be having conversations this way than to have them in person. But I think it actually improves safety in a virtual group when you can see each other, because you can see everyone's reactions, and you can, again, like if you're facilitating, you can read the responses of people, and you can tell if folks are having a hard time or if there's something going on that you need to dive into a little bit more. So I think I agree with you. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah. Okay, diving into the proxemics, my obvious question is, everyone has a different idea. Like I'm thinking of the close talkers that we all know, where it's like everyone just has a different idea of what is an appropriate amount of space. Mm-hmm. So what are some, like, I don't know, general rules or guidelines here, and when everyone has maybe a different standard?
I think that often it comes down to the sort of relationship that you have with the other person that you're having a conversation with. So like I will have a different spatial relationship with my kids or my husband than I will with a coworker, let's say, right? Or a client. because we don't have the level of intimacy or trust that allow me to be within your personal bubble. And so I always think, like, for me, I'm one of those people who, like, I would always prefer to be closer to you than farther away. But I think that it's always good to err on the side of more space, right? And again, when we're talking about a scenario where it's a veterinarian and a client, or a veterinarian and a staff member, or whatever it happens to be, remembering that power differential and keeping in mind that the closer we are to somebody, the more that's reinforced. And so, you know, especially if there's some sort of conflict, kind of pumping the brakes a little bit and trying to give a little bit more space, I think is smart, right? And I think, you know, that comes into another piece of proxemics, is that height difference. Yeah. And so oftentimes we'll come into an exam room, the client will be sitting, we'll be standing, and we'll remain standing for the entire time. Right? I really got into the habit when Mike and I worked together where I would sit on the exam table, because then I was kind of at the same height as my clients, because it was weird. Like, I would come in there and I'm standing over them and I'm telling them all the things we need to do. And so the natural response to that would be, because there's already a power differential, they're just going to be like, well, do whatever you want, because, like, I'm feeling uncomfortable with this. Right. And so if we can, you know, equalize that a little bit, that makes a really big difference. Yeah.
Sorry, this is a bit of a curveball. In the vet clinic, staff to staff, where personal space sometimes just goes out the window because everyone's wrangling a big dog or whatever. What do you do in those situations where, like, it's just, you know, we're awkwardly close?
Yeah. And so I think that's a really tricky one, because sometimes the nature of the job demands that we are in each other's personal bubbles. But I think that, you know, if there's a situation where it's going to get more uncomfortable. So let's say, worst case scenario, you know, I'm the veterinarian and I have to somehow reach over and around my coworker, right? Like, I think we use the principles of consent here. And we say, I think I need to reach over you. Are you comfortable with that? Right? Or, you know, how do you feel if I reach over top of you? Because the thing that we have to remember, and this gets into a whole other conversation of, like, trauma-informed approaches and things like that, but we have to remember that a lot of people have really difficult experiences that have to do with their personal space and invasion of that. And so as soon as we get into a situation where that might happen in our interpersonal connection or interpersonal interaction, it's really important for us to remember that we don't know people's backgrounds. And if we want to make sure that that's not going to cause harm, then we better be asking permission.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree, Jordan, that your communication level must increase directly approximate to that personal space that you're encouraging, or you might be encountering?
Yes, I love that. That's so true. Absolutely. Because I think anytime that we take away people's ability to like, make a choice about changing the interaction, then I think we need to up the communication. So more communication is better. Yes, absolutely. That's such a great observation. Love it.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking through that one. In some situations, it's a little bit tough because sometimes it happens fast. Like in a veterinary clinic setting, the animal does something which totally changes dynamics, and all of a sudden the space just disappears and everyone's holding on. You know, so it's in some of these, it has to be maybe well in advance, like almost like a team meeting, like, this is going to happen, let's prep for it.
So I can speak to that specifically, Mike. In CPR training in emergency hospitals in my former job, we had to have where the person actually stood in the context of CPR, because we would have 7 people rushing. Everybody would be crowding around each other, reaching over each other, getting uncomfortable, when this is not how this is both not to the benefit of patient care as well as proximities that were in place in this hospital. So we positioned people, and it made a big difference. Now, I point to Jordan yesterday, we had anesthesia where an animal started waking up. My tech reached right over and started holding the animal. There's nothing to be done there.
No. And I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Is sometimes all of that goes out the window because there's something that's more important, right? So, like, patient safety is number one, right? But I think anytime we want to also make it safe for everyone in the environment. And so I like, this is an interesting thing for me, just thinking about having those conversations in advance about, how do we do this in a way that's respectful of everybody's boundaries? Because, like, yeah, we got to have boundaries between each other too. And that can get really difficult in a vet clinic setting. We all know that, right? So, yeah.
Okay, Jordan, I know we talked a lot on the autonomic stuff. On paralanguage, we have dove into sort of tone and emphasis. Anything in there you want to add in before we kind of wrap up here?
I think that one of the things that's so fascinating about paralanguage is it's a really powerful tool to influence some of the other things. So I find paralanguage to be a tool that can influence some of our autonomic responses. So to me, it's the like nonverbal, like linguistic piece of, our neurological grounding. So, because as soon as I start talking slowly like this and lower the tone of my voice, my heart rate goes down. I feel really great. Like, it's very peaceful. You know what I mean? And so I think that we can, again, like, it's such a powerful tool. So that, again, when people start playing with some of this nonverbal stuff, that's one of the places where I really think it's useful to begin. Because as soon as we start noticing the huge effects that those can have, not only as on us as individuals, but also on whoever we're interacting with, I think it's magical. For me, when, again, going back to the low stress handling bit, when I talk to students about that, I always talk about how, like, I used to hate working with cats because someone would always get maimed, right? Like, there was always scratching and biting and screaming, and it was terrible. But once I learned some of these tools and got aware of my own paralanguage, my own autonomic changes, and all those sorts of things, it was like a switch flipped. And now it is the holy grail tool when it comes to working with cats. Like, if you can be calm and chill about the cat, like, there's almost nothing that's going to go wrong, right? Or you can manage it a lot better. And so I really think that that's the place to begin, for sure. And it's I could talk about it forever because I just think it's so amazing.
So what I'm hearing, Jordan, is lock yourself in a room with feral cats until you manage your paralanguage, and the cats will let you know when you have it on point.
Cats will 100% let you know. But I think, what I always tell students is, if you can, before you go into a scenario where you think you're going to be worried, right? So whether that's you're going into your first podcast episode, or you're going into your first euthanasia appointment where you know that you're feeling really nervous, or like as the doctor, or you're going into your first surgery, if you can do a little bit of sort of self-checking and do some of this stuff, take a couple of deep breaths, maybe have like a slow paced talk with someone, or really sort of consciously use those tools while you're discussing with your technician, the draping of the suture you want, whatever it happens to be. Like, that is going to make a really huge difference. And so that's where I got started when I started sort of figuring out some of this stuff again with cats. Is like, before going into the room with the cat, I took a really deep breath and I just like slowed the pace of my heart down and I slowed my breathing down, and it made a massive difference. So yes, lock yourself in a room with feral cats.
That's the take home. Okay, right on, Jordan. So this was part 2, nonverbal. We've got part 3, reflective listening, and then part 4, empathy, coming up. The open-ended questions episode, you ended with a challenge. So I think let's go back to that again. A challenge for anyone listening to improve their nonverbal communication.
So I think that the first step, and the thing that I think everyone should do, is I'm going to come back to playing with paralanguage. So next time you're in a conversation with someone and you can feel yourself starting to get activated for whatever reason, right? Whether that's because you're nervous because of who the other person is, or because the conversation is getting heated, play around with slowing down the tone of your voice and the pace that you're speaking. Try that alone and see what kind of an effect that has on you, and see what kind of an effect that has on the conversation and the interaction. And I really think that will sell it for people. That alone is going to sell it. And then, then you can go into observing some of the other things. But paralanguage is the tool. Start to play with that. Let me know how it goes.
Thank you for listening to the Veterinary Project Podcast. As a recap, on behalf of our hosts, the Veterinary Project Podcast will be releasing new episodes weekly, so be sure to tune in as we bring you more conversations aimed at helping you enjoy a life well lived. If you enjoyed what you heard on the show and you want to stay in the know, please like, love, and or subscribe to the podcast on the listening platform of your choosing, as we're available on all the usual suspects. If you know of others that may benefit from these conversations, we'd love it if you please share the show with them, as this will help us grow our community to reach more and more veterinary professionals. Speaking of which, if you are a veterinary professional and would like to get connected with more like-minded individuals who are joining us on this journey, please send an email to the veterinaryprojectpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll invite you to be a part of our private Facebook group. General feedback, requests for information, or perhaps requests to be a guest on the show can also be sent to the Veterinary Project Podcast @gmail.com. Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Veterinary Project Podcast. Bye for now.